Well, hey everyone, I'm here today with my good friend Joel Natalie. Joel has been a longtime friend, a former staff member of McLean Church, presently the general manager of TalkErie Radio. And as many of you know, Joel does a daily show, the Joel Natalie Show, from 3 to 6 every weekday. And for the last couple years, we've been doing a once-a-month show together called An Hour with My Pastor, right, Joel?
It's fantastic.
And we have been able to just talk about a number of ways that our faith practically applies to everyday realities. As we've been thinking a lot about the future of the church, about the current reality of the church, we thought it would be great to sit down together and have a conversation about where we are as a church overall, where we're headed, and what hope there might be for the church in general in the days to come. So Joel, welcome. Always great to have a conversation with you. So, and I know these are things that you've been thinking about. I mean, you're a student of culture, sure. and you this has been on your mind.
Well, it's so funny because I do get to talk to faith leaders like you every month, but you know, I had Bishop Persico on just a few weeks ago, and there's a lot of common threads in the Big C Church, you know, and again, one of our core values is unity in the Big C Church. So I think it's important for us to be taking that look. And Brian, can you believe it that we're literally just a couple weeks away from 2 years under the pandemic overlay?
Yeah, really hard to believe or imagine that, 2 years ago when all this hit, we were talking about if we could get through weeks of this, and then it became months, and now it's years, and everything has shifted, hasn't it?
It feels like this is different than a snowstorm weekend or some kind of other thing that would interrupt the church and the normal operation of it. Yeah. So can we talk about what is reality right now?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about this is there's a great temptation to look at where we are right now and say, it's the result of the pandemic. But when you assess the current state of the church, the truth is what we're experiencing right now is something that's been developing for a number of years. In fact, arguably a decade or more. You know, anybody who regularly attends our church right now would obviously note the lower in-person attendance. Things don't seem as exciting or vibrant in many ways as they have in the past. And the thing to note is that seems to be the general experience of churches across the board. I don't if Bishop Persico shed any light on that, but in the church leaders I'm talking to, everybody's experiencing the same thing, a decline of attendance, a seeming decline in interest. And it's tempting to think that's all because of the pandemic. That's all because of COVID. But when you look at the data, it's not. You know, what we know is that church attendance in our culture, in American culture, has been on the steady decline for really the better part of the past 2 decades. In fact, I saw a recent survey that said, I think in 1,500 or maybe even it was 15,000 churches surveyed, their attendance between 2000 and 2020, the mean attendance had dropped in half.
Wow.
And you know, when we think about our own church, the reality of it is we'd seen that trend developing, and then COVID hit, and it just accelerated it.
Right. It does beg the question, so is the church still relevant?
Yeah, and this is such an important question to ask, because the truth that we probably don't want to readily admit is the church, at least in North America, has really lived quite well on a cultural underpinning that assumed that church attendance was a good thing, whether it practically benefited you or not.
Well, I'm thinking of like It's a Wonderful Life, right. Where he said, on VE Day they cried and prayed. On VJ Day they cried and prayed. It was a universal thing.
That's right, and we have to admit that certainly for the better part of our lives, there's been this underpinning in American culture, even among people who don't attend church. Right. That church is still something that's good to do, that church is a good thing to have as part of your life, and even if you're not doing it, you realize maybe you should do it. That assumption is gone. And that is probably a good thing. Because what that is requiring us to do as a church is really get clear on the question, what are we here for? And what does the church really have to offer its culture or its world?
Now that is a huge question.
It is, especially if you get beyond the superficiality of it to it. Because, obviously, people of faith might readily say, well, the church has Jesus to offer, or it has salvation to offer, all true. But that needs articulated in a more meaningful way to a culture that no longer holds an assumption that Jesus is important or helpful.
I remember the battles that we used to fight 10, 20 years ago were, hey, we have people coming to our Sunday school that don't know the story of Jonah and the whale, right? I mean, that was the old battle. Right. Now it's the idea of, yeah, I understand that Jesus is out there, but what would he have any impact on my life? Or why would I even want to associate with these people? And you just throw the label on them.
Right, and here's what's different today. It's not just people outside the church that are asking that question. It's people inside the church that are asking that question. I think truthfully, what's happened, Joel, and let's just honestly admit it, COVID kept a lot of us from attending church regularly, and the truth is, some of us said, I really am not missing it that much. I'm kind of liking having my Sunday morning free. I'm kind of liking that I don't have to get all the kids dressed and fed and out the door to make the 11 o'clock Sunday morning service. I'm not missing it that much. And this is a great opportunity for the church to say, okay, why is that the case? And the wrong answer, even though it's the tempting and attractive answer, is to put it back on the person. Right. And say, well, if you're not missing church, the problem is with you. Well, maybe not. Maybe the problem is with the church.
So you think, again, going back, it was always a communications issue. Well, if we could just, envelop it with rock and roll music and great lighting and, visual effects and, flash pots or whatever you wanted to put behind it, and the V-neck T-shirt of the pastor, we're way beyond that right now.
Way beyond it. Where we're at right now is we're in a culture where people are rightly saying, I have 24 hours in a day, I have 7 days in a week, and I have all these things that I need to fit into that limited, finite space of time. And I'm going to fit into those things those activities that are important and beneficial to me. And there's no longer a cultural assumption that I should do certain things like go to church if I'm not experiencing any benefit from that.
So let's peel off that layer and talk about what is the felt need of people, because people still need to belong. Yes. People still want to be a part of something greater than themselves. Yeah. People still want to hope in a loving and gracious God.
And this is what I'm most excited about, Joel. And in 2 weeks, the first weekend in March, we're going to be talking about this as part of our weekly sermon. And really, this is the issue we're going to address. What does the church have to offer? But just to kind of set that up, I think the biggest thing the church has to offer, and stay with me on this as I develop it, because right out of the gate, it doesn't seem that exciting. Foundational to what the church has to offer is a system for faith. A system for faith. Here's what we know, and this is what I think everybody knows, whether they're a church person or a person of any kind of faith or not. People know that as human beings, we are deeply spiritual. There is a deeply spiritual, call it whatever you want, spiritual dimension to life, God-shaped vacuum in our soul, quest for something beyond ourselves, desire for the infinite. Call it whatever you want. What people know is there's something inside of me that is not defined by my physical reality or my material possessions. There's a dimension of life that we would call spiritual. That dimension of life, like every dimension of life, needs tended and developed if we're going to have the full human experience. And so people throughout the ages have recognized the need for a system to help us develop that spirituality and that faith. And that system is precisely what the church provides. It provides a structure by which the spiritual dimension of my life can be tended and developed. And of course, in the case of the church, in the case of Christianity, this is through the teachings and example of Jesus. This is taking the foundation of Jesus' teaching, Old Testament Judaism, and the reality of Jesus' teaching in the disciples in the early church, and it's taking all of that to begin to develop a system by which my faith, my spirituality, can be defined and developed. And there's more.
So are you saying that the system may not be changing, but the outward expression of that system might be in significant transition right now?
Yeah, yes, I think that's a fair way to say it. Okay. Or maybe it's best not to even say the system. Maybe it's fair to say that the content is not changing. The content is not changing. But the way that content is delivered, I think is very much changing. But, well, maybe we want to stay there for a minute. Then we'll talk a little bit more about the uniqueness of this faith system that Jesus taught, that the church conveys or communicates, because I think it is unique. And if someone were saying, well, there are a lot of different faith systems out there that could help me develop my spirituality, fair enough, and you ought to consider whatever you think is the right thing for you. I'll be honest in saying that. But I do think there are some unique facets of Christianity that maybe make it particularly appealing.
All right, let's bring the helicopter down a little bit from the very high to where we're at here in McLean Church here in Erie County. So roll back to March of 2020, and even really before that, we had already established an online presence. I was involved with that in my staff role here, which preceded 2018. But it really came in handy during the pandemic, because we didn't have to scramble for cameras or scramble for bandwidth or a system of executing online service. We were ready to rock and roll. And I got to tell you, even now, 2 years later, it is very, I'll use the word convenient, for me to be in my PJs with my feet up on my coffee table with my laptop open, and I'm watching Pastor Ben, Pastor Brian, Pastor Mike, and Pastor Lenora preach.
And the online service, which seems like such a big thing, or seemed like such a big thing when we did it, and thanks to folks like you and Chris Norris, who really had the vision and the passion to make that happen. In reality, the online service, it's just a small example of the type of changes that we think are going to be necessary to deliver the content of Christian faith or of the church to a whole new culture and a whole new world. The online thing, and again, it served us so well during the pandemic, but what it really did was it opened all of our eyes up to say, I don't have to physically be at a particular building at a particular time to still receive the benefits of this system of faith that the church conveys. Now, again, I totally understand and agree with that there are huge assets and benefits from being face-to-face, person to person. And those can't be denied, but they're not always necessary or essential. And so we can no longer say to a person that, if you really want to be close to God, you've got to do it in person at either 9 or 11 at Edinburgh or 10 o'clock at Union City, or Wednesday night at 6 in Erie. We can't say that anymore, and the reason we can't say it is because we've got lots of evidence of people who have maintained a very vital and growing faith over the last 2 years and have never darkened the doors of one of our buildings.
I'd really love to hear a story or two of how this has been working, because I think people might have a question mark in their minds about this.
Yeah, well, if you do, I understand the question, but let me put it to rest, because we could cite multiple examples, but let me share with you just one. A good friend of mine who certainly has had an interest in the church, an interest in spirituality, but for whatever reason has never felt real comfortable coming to one of our locations. At the beginning of the pandemic, began engaging consistently in our online services, and now regularly when I see him, he has a comment about the sermon of the past week, talks about how much it has meant to him and his family that they can engage with this without having to overcome the barrier of being in a room like this with lots of other people. And it's just one story. We could fill a whole video of people who would say the same thing. It's worked. I know another person in not even in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And they're in a setting where their job prevents them from attending a service on Saturday or Sunday. Yeah. They began engaging with us online. I was talking to them not long ago when they said, McLean is my church. I'm not looking anywhere else, because it provides the access that I need that works for my reality. And you say, how can you argue with that?
Can I just share an editorial comment too? The upgrading of the system, so the website, the app on the phone, all those things. And again, I'm an old timer. I like to do it the old way. That has been enormously helpful to make sure that I'm able to stay consistent with what my intentions are. So if I want to tithe every week, I could set it up through the app. If I want to know what's going on at church, I can look at the announcements on the app. And I tell you, I mean, I know it's like makes it super easy, and everything should be hard.
This is the problem when I want to jump up and down about this. Why is it that the standard we apply to everything else somehow gets turned 180 degrees when we start talking about church? It's the dumbest thing in the world. And you heard us a few months ago use the analogy of banking and comparing church to banking and the changes in banking, the changes there. I was thinking of another one just this week, grocery shopping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now think about it in its present reality.
Like
so yeah. I can still go to the grocery store if I want, and I can go to a grocery store 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no limitation of my schedule to when I can shop for groceries. But if I don't want to go, I can have somebody shop for me. I can Instacart it. But you know what? If I don't want to do either of those things, I was on the Walmart app last night. Literally, I was lying in bed. There were a couple things that we needed, and I thought, you know what? Why not now? I punched it into my phone, got the few things we needed, hit PayPal, so I didn't even have to enter my address or credit card, and this has become the expected norm in our world. But to the person who has never grown up in church, never had a faith system, we say to them, we have something that'll change your life, but it's got to be at 9 or 11 on Sunday morning, and preferably every Sunday morning if it's really going to work. And Joel, it's just not true.
Yeah.
As much as I would like to say it was. Because you realize we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. It's talking like this, right? Because all of us love to see full auditoriums, and we like to see hundreds, if not thousands, of people saying, "Hey, I'm part of McLean Church." But the reality of it is, you don't need to be engaged in some of the ways that maybe we previously thought you did to still be able to access this system of faith and to access something else. And that's where I think the Christian faith maybe is somewhat unique. This system of faith that we teach, build on the teachings of Jesus, it has two other vital components, almost like two legs that it stands on. One leg is community. Right. We're not doing this alone. There's a relationship that we have with each other. I mean, think of our own history, Joel. We would have never crossed paths were it not for that system of faith that put us in community with each other, that resulted, in a lifelong friendship. But there's another component, and this is what we're particularly excited about thinking intentionally about in this year that's ahead of us. And that second component, we could broadly label it a service component, but I'd really like to talk about it as doing good. The church is a community that gets together to do good in the world. And I'll tell you, I think McLean Church has always been at its best. Not when we've had, 2,000 plus people here on a Christmas Eve, or when we've had a huge weekend where people have invited their friends and family. I think McLean Church has always been at its best when we've done good in our community, when we've provided Christmas presents, for people who needed them, when we've helped the city mission provide Thanksgiving meals for its members. Joel, our care fund, we talked about on Christmas, way over $1 million that have been put into our community, into people's hands that have needed it. This is when we're at our best. And I think the church at its best, it provides this system for faith, this system that makes sense of my spirituality because Jesus makes sense of that. But it also provides a community where I can belong, and it provides a means by which I can do good in the world. And of course, you don't need the church, you don't need an organization to do good in the world. But if an organization can harness a whole bunch of people together to do good in the world, oh my, the impact.
We talk a lot in my world about agency. Yeah. People are looking for agency, yes. And the church is, in your description, is amazing with that. All right, we're down to our last couple minutes because people love you and your family. People love our pastors. They love our staff members. And so they start getting a little worried about when you see declining attendance, it probably corresponds with declining finances. So let's unpack that a little bit. Is worry warranted?
Well, Jesus says, do not worry about your life. So
that's my flesh talking.
Yeah. Well, let's, excuse me, let's talk about this on a couple different levels. First of all, a concern to us as a church is how do we keep track of the people who are part of this community and who want to do good through this community if those people aren't all showing up at the same place and same time every week. That's a real challenge because before the pandemic, when our focus was primarily on the weekend worship services, it was real easy to know who you were trying to build relationships with. It was real easy to know who you were trying to serve with because you saw them every weekend. There are people that I have not seen in 2 years, but I was just looking yesterday at a list of our who and where report, that we asked people to fill out. I saw the names of so many people that I haven't seen and wondered about, but they're still there. They're still part of McLean Church. So being able to identify who we are as a church is a huge concern. And just an aside, if you're part of our church and haven't filled out that who and where form, go to the website and do it, go to our app and do it, fill out a paper copy at one of our sites, because it will be so helpful for us to know, who we are out there. So that is a concern. How do you keep track of, the New Testament talks about the church as a flock, Mm-hmm. How do you keep track of your flock if you don't see your flock every week? We're convinced we can do it, but we've got to figure out how to do it. Finances, they're a huge thing, and this presentation certainly is not aimed at generating income, but I need to talk honestly that our income has significantly declined over the past 2 years. And I think this mirrors the same trend that we've seen with attendance. It's not just the pandemic. It's that underlying cultural shift where people no longer have sort of an ingrained assumption that, I should give a portion of my money away, whether it's to the church or to anything. And so, we're really asking the question, does the traditional funding model that is built just on people choosing to give if they want to the church, does that work? Because it's a crazy model. Can you imagine, Joel, if you had a lawn mowing business, and you had 30 yards that you mowed every week and that was your source of income, but rather than send people a bill for what they got, you just said, pay me if you feel like it and whatever you feel like. But that's what the church does, right? We provide a service, we provide tangibles every week but we don't charge for them. So we just say, if you can, help us out. And our people have been incredibly generous and faithful over the years in doing that. But I'll be honest, we are seeing a shift. So, we're asking the hard question of, boy, how do you keep this going? Because it does take money to keep it going. But the hope in all that is, not just a hope, but really a firm belief, is that we all want to invest in things that we believe are valuable. And so if we can help people understand the value of the church, the money will follow.
Last question. As a sold out Jesus lover and a sold out person, member of McLean Church, what do you want me? What do you want from me? What do you want me to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Stay connected and engaged in the way that makes sense for you. Stay connected and engaged in the way that makes sense for you. If that means watching online in your pajamas every weekend, great. Just do it. Stay consistent at it. If you can only come to church practically in person once a month, well then do that once a month. If you're not part of a regular worship experience, but you're engaged in one of our groups or one of our support groups, maybe Grief Share or a small group, stay engaged with that, because developing our spirituality requires intentionality, and that's what the church can help us with. So stay engaged, stay connected, and let us know you're there. Let us know through that who and where form. Let us know you're out there, so that we can serve you. Maybe a final thought to sort of wrap all this up that is so important to keep in mind. I really think we're at the beginning of a huge cultural and church transition. I think 100 years from now, church historians will look back and say, yep, this was a trend that was developing. The pandemic hit, it accelerated the trend, and it ushered in a whole new era of church. It ushered in a whole new model of church. It ushered in a whole new approach to Jesus' teachings and how they're applied and lived out in our lives. I think it's that big. We're not there yet. We're in this ramp-up period to that change. And those of you who've been part of McLean Church for any length of time know that we are always early adopters. Yeah. We've always tried to be pioneers, and we know that pioneers usually pay a very high price. It's the first people over the Oregon Trail that suffer the greatest, but they open the trail for generations to follow successfully. I would like to think that God is asking us, that God is prompting us, that God is directing us to be a bit of a pioneer in this moment, just like we were 30 years ago. And I know that's not easy for any of us, because it means questioning some deeply held assumptions. It means letting go of some things that are deeply meaningful to us. It involves transition and change, which none of us like. But if God's called us to play that role, to maybe open the door for generations behind us to follow, who wouldn't want to do that? Because where the Spirit is leading, that's where the excitement is.
Wouldn't it be cool to have a time come again, like happened in the early church, where the people of the way, that's what they called the Christians, right, were so remarkably counterculture in their good works and their integrity that everybody talked about them, everybody looked to them.
And Joel, that is the model. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with our friends in Germany, Project X in Augsburg, talking to their pastors about some things. And, you know, they said, you know, our vision is we want to be an irresistible church. They said, we want to be known for such good and such community and such relevant teaching that people can't resist being part of us. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's why the early church had such success, because people said, you can't resist this. The system is so good. The community is so good. The service is so good. I can't resist being a part.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Joel.